Hi, this is December 1st, 2013. We're at our home in Stone Mountain at 5418 Leatherstocking Lane. And this is a continuation of the interview that took place last July. This time we're going to talk a little bit about my mother. My mother is Verda Fenton Seeliger. Her maiden name was Verda Fenton. She was born in Victoria, Canada, of her mother, which was Amelia Baker, and her father and her husband, Frank Fenton Sr. My grandmother was born in 1883 in Stratford-on-Avon. The family did not know anything about her whereabouts. She never talked about her past at all with anyone. All they knew is that she met Frank Fenton, my grandfather, when he had a serious leg injury up in the Yukon Territory. He was a mining engineer and participated in the gold rush in Alaska from the 1890s to the early 1900s. I believe they met around 1903 at St. Cecilia Hospital, where she was a nurse. She was 18 years old. But prior to that, none of us knew anything about her background, except she said she was born in Stratford-on-Avon. So when I went back to England with Gwen on our honeymoon back in 1970, I went to the offices of the registry at Stratford-on-Avon and found out that my grandmother was illegitimate. How she got to Victoria was a mystery until just recently. What is not often talked about, that whenever there were orphans born in Great Britain, they were routinely shipped out to the colonies. In this case, for whatever reason, my grandmother became an orphan, and she was part of a group of about 1,500 orphans that were shipped in the late 1890s into Western Canada for settlement purposes. Western Canada was like the Western United States, almost totally undeveloped. And so she moved there. I do not know who she lived with, but eventually she started to receive training at St. Cecilia Hospital as a nurse. Her origin beyond that, we do not know. She married Frank Fenton, who I mentioned was a mining engineer. When he suffered from a mining accident, she apparently cared for him, and they fell in love and married in Victoria, BC. And that's where the Fenton family pretty much was developed. The oldest was Bill, William Fenton, and then came, and then next came Frank Fenton, the junior, and then my mother Verda, and her younger sister Gwen. During the early years of their lives, while he was in Alaska nearly 6 to 8 months a year doing his engineering work, he returned to Seattle. She would do a lot of different things. Her grandmother owned and operated a grocery store where my mother often worked, the family worked. She worked as a nurse. She did all she could to keep the family going until Frank returned. And this is apparently their lives until suddenly in 1940, for some reason we do not know, in 1938 he became extremely ill. It may very well have been cancer or something else, but he died in 1940. So I never met my grandfather. I was born in November of 1940. When they married, they had a torturous beginning. My mother was, of course, an Anglican, but the Fenton family, which was in the area around outside of San Francisco, known as Frenchman's Creek, or Frenchman's Ranch, or something to that effect. When they moved down there, immediately she faced enormous prejudice. They were Catholic, strong Irish Catholic, and they did not accept Anglicans for obvious reasons. The Irish looked upon the English as oppressors, and here Frank was marrying one of the oppressor's daughters. In fact, from what I've been told, they were there for a short time, then they moved to Seattle, which was necessitated by his work anyway, because he lived up in, because he was always going to Alaska. But thereafter, she never went back to see the in-laws in California. Thereafter, I was born, she would do all kinds of things. First, my mother was born in 1916, and as I say, she worked in the family store. And when she was 10 years old, she suffered from a horrendous auto accident, if you can imagine that, at the age of 14. This is in 1930. And she was hospitalized for several months. Broken leg, I think a broken hip, and a variety of things. And I think these injuries were to haunt her for the rest of her life. But eventually she did get well and did cooperate with the family and work with the family. And she became kind of my grandmother's favorite daughter. She was the oldest daughter. And then she started at the University of Washington. As I mentioned before, my father was at the University of Washington, but he was going there intermittently. He started in 1928 and eventually would graduate in 1938 while working several different jobs and going on part-time at the University of Washington. My mother happened to also graduate in 1938, and they met and they married. The marriage was secret. They had to elope to Mount Vernon, Washington. The reason it was kept secret is because my mother had a job working at Snoqualmie schools, and they did not hire women who were married. It was certainly gender bias, but also there were so many men out of work. They felt that they should favor men over any circumstance over women in their employment. So, as it is, my mother kept her secret, and she commuted from Seattle to Snoqualmie for at least a couple of years. I was born in November of 1940, and my brother Mike was born in July of 1943. Thereafter, she worked in a variety of jobs at the post office. My father got her a job at the post office where my father was working. And she worked there until about 1948. And then she decided she wanted to get a master's degree in teaching. And she did. It took her 2 years, but she got her master's at the University of Washington in education. She was really favored by the University of Washington for a lot of reasons. In fact, while she was in the business school back in 1938, while she was still in school, they were experimenting with a new kind of typewriter, the way that changing the lettering on the keys, and she had to learn how to type in that manner. And she did. And at one point, she was the world's fastest typist. I have no certification of it, but she was very proud of that. In 1938, because of this new system, which never was adopted, she was able to type at a huge rate of speed, something like 180 words a minute. And then after that, she was out of the business school, and then she went back to the school, as I say, in 1948, 10 years later, and got her master's. She started teaching in a small school out in the south of Seattle. I can't recall the name, but it was in Kent, which is about 20 miles south of our home. And I was in school, and I had been in the 7th or 8th grade, and when I came home, and my mother increasingly could not get out of bed. And so finally, and this happened, I'd take care of her in the mornings, have to push her to help her get up, so she absolutely determined to go to school and finish the school year. But the last time I went to see her, she was hospitalized. She had rheumatoid arthritis in a time when no one knew how to treat it. And eventually she would be paralyzed by it and stop working altogether, although while she was paralyzed, she made a lot of money. And she did it by doing phone solicitations for hearing aid salesmen, which sounds amazing, but she would make these appointments, and if a hearing aid salesman made a sale, she would get 10% of whatever 10 or 15% of whatever the sale was. And these hearing aids were selling for about $500. So she can make maybe $60 to $75 for every sale that took place. And she was good at her work. Incidentally, it also makes me very suspicious of hearing aid salesmen because I'm now acquainted with what the market was for a hearing aid back in the late 1950s. And even though I have hearing difficulties, I'm kind of leery about going to get yet another hearing aid because I know there's a lot of charlatans in the business, so it's hard to find. I haven't found someone I thought would be trustworthy enough to buy any hearing aids from. She would do that, and she would continue to be paralyzed. My dad would take care of her. She was able to get by in the day, and during the summer months, I'd take care of her, and my brother would too, until I went off to college at the University of Washington in 1958. She would live for the next 12 years, and then in 1969, a year after my father died, she finally passed as well. She was in very poor health, been confined to her bed for the last 12 years, and when she finally did fail, it was hard to know. She had so many things wrong with emphysema, could have been a heart attack. She did not have cancer, but she could not move. She could not. She was confined to bed. She could walk to the toilet, maybe walk out to sit with the family for a period of time, but she spent most of her time in bed. I think of her as a kind of a tragic figure because she had so much talent going for her, and for a variety of reasons she was never able to exploit it during her life. Well, that's the story of my mother.
Could you give us her birth and
Yeah,
death
she was
dates?
born in Saffron-on-Avon in 1883. Her grandmother, excuse me. Her grandmother's name was, I said it earlier. It just didn't.
Amelia?
Yeah, that's right, Amelia Baker. She was born in 1914 in Victoria, BC.
1914, and then she passed
In 1969.
79.
You're right, 1979.
Thank you.